Great. Welcome again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. This is a much requested webinar. We're going to be talking about portfolios. We'll have lots of advice for you. So we're happy that you'll be joining us, and we'll have time at the end for lots of questions. So here with me today, so my name is Christy Brown. I'm a graduate coordinator here at the Design School. We also have Phil Horton. He's our interim school director. Phil, would you like to say hello?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to see you all.
Great. And we also have Corey Cisco. Corey, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Corey Cisco. I'm a graduate coordinator senior here at the Design School, and Christy and I work together for the graduate programs.
Yes, we'll be the ones helping you through the application process, and then once you're a student, throughout the rest of the program. So this is just kind of an overview of the various programs that we have here at the Design School. So I'll kind of run through these. A note while I'm going through them, you'll see in the studio-based programs that there are 3-year and 2-year pathways for many of these programs. 2-year pathways are for students who have an undergraduate degree in the field that they want to pursue their graduate degree in. So if it's a Master of Architecture, they already have a bachelor's degree in architecture. The 3-year pathways, or the 3+ pathways you'll see, those are for students who have an undergraduate degree that's unrelated to the field that they want to pursue in their graduate studies. So if you have a bachelor's degree in English or in math, you can still pursue architecture. You would just go into that 3-year pathway. So our studio-based programs, we have the Master of Architecture. This is a STEM designated program. Master of Interior Architecture, the Master of Industrial Design, which is also STEM designated. The Master of Landscape Architecture, this is STEM designated, and they also have a special 2+ program. That's for students who have a degree, their undergraduate degree is kind of related to landscape architecture, but it's not exactly landscape architecture. So they might have a bachelor's degree in architecture or in planning, something that's kind of somewhat related. We also have the Master of Science in Innovation and Venture Development. This is STEM designated, and this is a new program that we launched this year in partnership with W.P. Carey and the Fulton Schools of Engineering. We have the Master of Urban Design program and the Master of Visual Communication Design. And then we also have several research-based programs. This is the Master of Science in Architecture, which is STEM designated, the Master of Science in Design with concentrations in industrial design, interior design, and visual communication design, and then our PhD in Design, Environment, and the Arts. And just another quick note on the STEM designations. This comes with a variety of benefits, especially for you international students who are calling in. This has an extension to the OPT benefits. So you get an additional 24 months of OPT. So something just to kind of note that makes those special. So the application process, there are 2 parts to this. We have the graduate college application, which is just kind of your generic application to ASU in general. All graduate students have to fill out this application. It's going to be information about yourself, your previous education history. You will upload your unofficial transcripts when you submit this application, and then your official transcripts don't have to come until after you've been accepted. You'll also, if you're an international student, need to provide English proficiency, so TOEFL, IELTS, or the Duolingo. There's lots of different options for the English proficiency requirement. And then the GRE scores for select programs. The PhD requires that, as does the Master of Science in Architecture program. And then the other application that you'll need to fill out is the slide room application. This one's really more specific to the design school. This is what the admissions committees really focus on when they're evaluating you. So this is where you want to put a lot of your efforts. And this is where the portfolio portion that we're going to be really delving down deeper into today. This is where that's required. You'll also need to submit a statement of purpose. And then the email addresses for 2 recommenders. So the system's great. You just need to put their names, email addresses, and then they will automatically get an email with a link to upload the recommendation for you. And we've already started our application cycle. Our priority deadline is January 15th. Since we got plenty of time, I recommend getting your application in by then. This is the deadline you have to meet if you want to be considered for funding opportunities, any scholarships or TA positions that we offer in the recruitment process.
And I think maybe just relative to the priority admissions deadline, there are oftentimes some additional funding opportunities that come free after that deadline when we find out that students are making their final decisions about what schools to go to. So you're welcome to apply beyond January 15th, but that's kind of the first real milestone relative to your initial opportunities for teaching assistantships, for scholarships, fellowships, etc. Okay, so I'm going to go through these 7 tips for portfolios, and I'm going to give you one quick, or maybe 2 quick preambles before we jump in. One, my background is in architecture. I teach architecture here at ASU. So the references that I'm going to share are examples from architecture portfolios. However, the tips are purposely meant to be sort of broad, or I'm saying universal, meaning that they apply to all types of design, whether you're applying for interior architecture, for industrial design, or any other program. The one other maybe quick thing that I'll say ahead of time is that one question that we often get is from folks who don't have a background in design. We do still require a portfolio, but we don't expect that you're going to have all the same design skills and experiences that someone who has a 4-year degree in architecture or design might have. So in those instances, things like creative photography, sketching, other just ways of demonstrating your creativity and your creative interests will work. The example that we always use, there's a sort of fable of a student who came to us who had studied under and was working at this really great sushi restaurant under a master chef. And their portfolio was essentially the craft of and the composition of sushi, which was something that they had become really versed in. And it was a really beautiful portfolio, really inspiring. And you saw that same attention to craft and detail in the student when they arrived, in that case, as an architecture student. But so the 7 tips that we're going to go through are going to be about making your portfolio personal, making it clear and confident, start strong, finish strong, teamwork makes the dream work, words matter, structure, 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 research, research, research. So starting with tip number 1, make it personal. Your portfolio is an opportunity for you to not just show that you have the skills to come into the program, but to really sort of tell your story and to connect it then to your statement of purpose or your letter of intent. And the key here is we really want to understand how you think and what makes you unique as a prospective design or architecture student. So here's a couple of, or here's an example. We had an applicant from Chennai in India just within the last couple of years who had a really beautiful series of photographs of either himself or some of his friends or other people in the city holding these mirrors reflecting key spaces across the city. And within it was then talking about sort of his attitude about the architecture of the city, what makes him want to be an architect. And in many instances was really focused on the juxtaposition between key architectural spaces and sort of everyday spaces where architecture seems not to really be a focus. And in that portfolio, it connects directly to as well his statement of intent, in which he talks about his first internship experience being focused more on product versus design process, and talks about the types of experiences that he's looking for and what his interest in is in a graduate education, specifically looking to further develop his understanding of design thinking and how that can inform an architecture that's more process-oriented, more community-engaged, rather than just product-oriented or construction-focused. So the next tip is make it clear and confident. And this is probably the most important tip. So the sub sort of tips here are: don't allow your portfolio to become too busy, synthesize, edit, hit the high notes. And you hear this a lot in design, and I understand there's a sort of cultural overlay here, but you'll hear things about, less is more, or embrace white space in a portfolio. And I'll just try to show you some examples of both what not to do and sort of what this means in terms of making a portfolio clear and confident. So unfortunately, without naming names, this is portfolio content from an applicant who was not accepted to the program. So these are sort of examples of what not to do. You can see that there's a number of different texts here scattered across the page, and then a number of different images. How they all connect and what it all means is really difficult to unpack. It's just so visually busy. And one of the things that's important to understand here is that frequently when your portfolio is being reviewed, either for graduate school or for a job, the first pass through a portfolio will take less than 2 minutes. So the critic is going to just look through the portfolio really quickly and make a high level decision about whether or not they want to then focus in. And so when you go through a portfolio that's really busy and that has really too much content and nothing really jumps off the page as in terms of what the portfolio is about, you're not going to go back through it in greater depth. You're going to put it aside and sort of move on to the next portfolio. Here again, you can see an example of a page that's just way too busy. You have 3 different schedules, 8 different drawings. Even this page, which is a little bit cleaner, there's 14 different drawings on this page. So your eye just doesn't know where to go, doesn't know where to focus. By contrast, and I should say that portfolio was only a 14-page portfolio. There are instances where a school might say, maximum 15 pages, at which point you start panicking, how am I going to get everything into the portfolio? The important thing here is to edit, not to try to show everything, but to let the really good work stand by itself and be confident that it's enough to show that you have the skills required. So by contrast, this is another portfolio from an applicant, also in this case from India. This is a page in the portfolio, not just an image in the portfolio. So it's 1 page, 1 drawing. It really allows you to kind of focus in. This is obviously a perspective drawing, so it pulls you into the space and you really start to kind of understand the kind of focus and what the intentions of this particular project are. In this portfolio, this is the same portfolio, this applicant from India, pages that are more sort of focused on concepts are left to stand by themselves. So this is a concept about, a infrastructure that connects a series of villages, and the infrastructure works both during the day and night. Then in pages that are more technical, where you see, site planning and you see some more detailed space planning, that's kept separate from pages that are more conceptually focused. Pages that are focused on sort of details and making are kept separate from pages that are more sort of urban scale and focus. So an old adage that my mentor used to tell me all the time, when you're putting together a presentation or a portfolio is, 1 page, 1 idea. If you're trying to get more than 1 idea on a single page, those ideas start competing, they start to muddle the reading of one another. So think of it as, what is the 1 idea that you're trying to convey on any given page in your project? And it's okay to have white space. You don't have to fill every square inch of the page. And if that means then that you have to have a bigger portfolio, at least in our case at ASU, we don't have a max requirement for your portfolio. So, if you need 40 plus pages to put everything in that you want to put in, it's not necessary to have that much content. But if you feel like you need that to be able to kind of capture everything, don't limit yourself to 14, 15 pages and then try to pack too much information on a given page. Allow yourself to have just really clean and clear composition on each page. So make it clear and make it confident. Next is start strong, finish strong. So when you're thinking of your portfolio, think of it as an experience from introduction through conclusion. It's always best to bookend with your 2 best projects. So think of it almost like when you were learning to write compositional essays in school. You start with your strong argument, you end with your strong argument, you have the sort of more weak or less developed arguments in the middle. So you want to start strong, finish strong, and think through how you move from project to project, what connects them all. So this is a portfolio from one of our graduates here in the school. It's a student who's really focused on craft, model making, structure, So this is the cover of the portfolio. The very first project is one of the strongest projects in the portfolio, has a lot of detail, is really sort of well resolved, is really sort of technically developed as a project. And so you can see all of that detail coming through. In the middle, there are a number of other projects, some of which are more urban scale, some of which are more research focused. Others are, you know, examples of models and other tectonics. But then the portfolio ends with another really strong project. So this had been one of the most recent projects that student had completed. And again, you can see that it's a very well developed project. So, you know, he started with one of his strongest projects and ends with one of his strongest projects. The next tip, teamwork makes the dream work. So designers in every discipline today, we are collaborators. We work on teams. We have people that work with us. In some cases, we're working across disciplines. That's a good thing. But how you recognize that the work is teamwork and how you really sort of celebrate that can be important in a portfolio. So this is a series of pages from a portfolio from a former student of ours, Luis, who actually completed a number of different projects that were teamwork oriented and really celebrates it in an incredible way. So this was a short making exercise, casting, and you can see he did this project with Eric and Yara. There's some images of them working together on the process. This was a brief competition project that Luis did with Hannah and Becky. And you can see sort of a number of the projects here, but it also talks about the process of working with these teammates. This was a longer project that Luis completed with Zach and Abel. And again, there's a description about sort of how they work together as a team, who was responsible for what within the project. This was an interdisciplinary competition project with Jessica, Nick, and Ya, students across multiple disciplines in design. And again, there's a description here about, you know, how did they work together? What was Luis's role in the project? This was an external competition completed with Nick and Zach. Here was a project. This was actually a studio that I ran that Luis was in. And I paired Luis up with Brendan and Angel. And in each case, there's a kind of discussion about, you know, how was Luis working in a group. And then Luis, during his time as a student with us, was also a leader in a student organization called the Latinx Architecture Student Organization. So in it, there's in the portfolio, there's also a lot of reference to, you know, being engaged as a peer leader in the student organization, and then the work that student organization was doing in the community. So you see how collaboration in the studio is also being enriched by his participation in a student organization and volunteer work in the community. So teamwork is a great thing, but make sure you credit your teammates and be clear about what your role was in the teamwork. Next, words matter. And so there's a little bit of a distinction here for folks who are interested in graphic design or visual communication design, where in some cases the type or the font is integral to the design. But when you're showing work and the text is really just supporting the design, explaining what the design is, it's really important to think through sort of how you use type. And so this is a portfolio example from a former student of ours. His name is Josh. And you can see that Josh has 8 different projects in his portfolio, but he's breaking them into 3 categories. So there's desert focused work. So we're here in the Sonoran Desert, the greenest desert in the world. So there's projects that are sort of place-based. There's impact focused work, which is really about social impact. And then there's the most recent projects, which are about a synthesis of the social and the physical or the geographical. So what you can see here is that Josh is using a number of different sort of typographic cues. So there's a brief description at the beginning of every project. The title is actually the one instance where he's using a font that has a serif. This is a slab serifed typeface, rather than everything else being sans serif. And you can see up here, so this is part of the Desert series. You can see the year, you can see what the project won, where it was published. And then on the next project, when you get to the next opening page, you'll see very much the same thing. So the body text is in the same place. It's roughly the same amount of space. The queue for publication and for any awards that were won, which part of the portfolio this fits into, is all really clear and consistent. And then when you get into the depths of some of these projects, you can see that the type is really small, so that it's not competing with the imagery, and that even when there are these diagrams that need further explanation, or in some cases need type of their own, you can see that the type is meant to sort of recede, so that again, it's not stealing your attention away from the drawings, or in this case, images, and the communication that's coming from those things. So how you use type and how you talk about your work is really important. Next, structure. So I would say this is the second most important thing to sort of convey here. So think of this almost like a business pitch. Tell us what you're going to tell us, then go through the project in a way that helps us understand how it fits into the big idea. And then the last thing that I would say is it's common to either put a resume or curriculum vitae, CV, in your portfolio. I would argue that if you're going to include that, put it at the back, so that it's pulling us through the entire portfolio, so that we can get to the end to see your experience, rather than putting it at the front. Because then if I start going through the work, I may stop, somewhere midway, either because I've seen enough and it's good, or I've seen enough and it's bad. But if the resume or portfolio or CV are at the end, then we're likely to go all the way through and see every single page in the portfolio. So this is a portfolio from a former student of ours, Austin, and you can see that this is the table of contents in the beginning. So we know that there are 6 things in the portfolio. 3 of these are student projects. 1 is a competition. 1 is examples of work that he's done in professional internships. And then the last is personal work, which in Austin's case is a series of photographs and sketches. What's really great about this portfolio is it's really consistent in how it's structured. So every project begins with a title page that has a rendering. It has the number of that particular project, 1, 2, 3. It has a short description. And then on the right-hand side is a lot of white space with a sketch. So if I'm going through the portfolio really quickly, I know that when I get to that page that has a lot of white space, that's a moment to pause and recognize that I've left one project and I'm going into another. Then after the title page comes the sort of analysis and the sort of conceptual part of the project. Then comes plans and sections, and lastly renderings, and then we go to the next project. So you experience it like this. You open up to a title page, you have a brief description, you get into the analysis and sort of the organizational principle of the project, plans and sections, renderings, and then you go to another title page with a brief description and a sketch, and it all starts over again. That sort of rhythm is really reassuring to someone who's reading the portfolio. And you know along the way that when you get to number 4 out of 6, you're about 2/3 of the way through the portfolio. So it helps to kind of reassure you as you're moving through it. And that structure shows that you're really organized and that you have the ability to sort of edit and put your work together in a way that helps people who are not familiar with the work be comfortable in being able to interpret it. And then Austin ends with a brief resume. So it shows professional experience, education, awards, and then some of the skills and where his work can be found, which I'll talk a little bit more about next. So finally, the last tip, number 7, research, research, research. So what you saw in Austin's CV was a Behance link. There are 2 web-based portfolio services where you can find thousands of portfolios on each. One is called Issuu, ISSUU, where we have a lot of our student work posted, including graduate portfolios. And the other is called Behance. Behance is actually owned by Adobe, and I would say that it's more common on Behance to find user interface design portfolios, visual communication design portfolios, particularly with mixed media, and even product design or industrial design portfolios. Issue, you're more likely to find architecture, landscape architecture, interiors, but there are certainly crossover in both directions. And the great thing is, you can jump on either of those sites, search for portfolio, and immediately see tons of examples and references. There are also a ton of really great sites, blog, design blog or architecture blog sites that post about portfolios, including tips. On the left here, ArcDaily posted a series of architecture portfolios that link back to either Issue or Behance, and you can look through a number of really great portfolios that were specially pulled out by this author. On the right here is a series of portfolio tips from Dzine. So you can see they have their own tips for you. Treat it like a competition, only show your best work, show your process, keep it quick and simple to read. So the great thing is, there are tons of advices out there that you can look through to really begin to understand how to just think about organizing your portfolio. There are also some really great videos online to be found.
Is to be honest and be very selective. Be honest and know what you're good at, filter out the junk, and then be selective. Find companies that you think you have an honest shot at getting a job.
So in that case, it's a portfolio talking about portfolio for employment, but a lot of the tips that are in this particular video also apply to graduate school portfolio design.
Hey everybody, welcome to The Process. I'm Chris and that's Jose. And today,
let me jump out of there. Jump back in. One of our faculty, Diane Bender, who is the head of the interior design, interior architecture program, also has a book specifically about portfolios called Design Portfolios, Presentation and Marketing for Interior Designers. So there are quite a few references that are specific to a discipline. I'm sure if you look for a landscape architecture portfolio guide, you'll find specific points for how to organize and convey your ideas as a landscape architect. So the best thing here is just you have a ton of really great references and examples that you can use. Please take advantage of those. Research, research, research. And so these are the 7 tips for your portfolio. Make it personal, make it clear and confident, start strong, finish strong, teamwork makes the dream work, words matter, structure, 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 and research, research, research. With that, we will open it up for any questions you might have. But thank you all for joining us this morning. I hope that these tips are helpful. And we'll also post this and send you the link later. So if you want to look back on any of the pages that were captured within, you're certainly welcome to do that. Thank you all. And I should say, we're going to take questions in the Q&A. So there are some questions that were in the chat, and we'll try to watch those as well. But there's a Q&A segment here in Zoom. So please post your questions there, and we'll look to answer them. So there's a question here. It says, thank you so much for your thorough explanation. Just to be clear, should I write my statement of purpose in my portfolio or not? So the statement of purpose, in our case, does not go in the portfolio. Slide Room, which Christy introduced earlier, has a separate place for you to type in your statement of purpose. And your portfolio will be linked inside of Slide Room. So when our admissions committees go through each of our applicants, we're looking at portfolio, we're looking at your statement of purpose, we're looking at your transcripts, and we're looking at letters of recommendation. And each of those things will come in separately into Slide Room. And if you have any questions about any of that, Christy or Corey can help walk you through those processes. So then Alex asks, I know there isn't a max amount of pages, but is there a recommendation on how long to have a portfolio to ensure it's engaging, but not too cumbersome? This is a great question. My advice to you is no less than 3 projects if you have a design background. If you don't have a design background, you're applying for a 3-year pathway, I don't think that rule applies. But if you've got a 4-year undergraduate degree and or professional experience, no less than 3 projects. And then I would say typically no more than 7. Beyond that, it feels like you don't have the ability to really edit. So if you had 3 projects and it was 4 to 5 pages each, you had 12 to 15 pages, and it's really, really great work, that could be enough. If you had, say, up to 7 projects and about 3 pages each, or 4 or 5 pages max, and you're getting into the sub 50 range, that's really sort of the high end. If you have more than 50 pages, while it might be good for you, it's going to be too much information for anyone who's going through it. And I should say, it brings up a really great point. Your portfolio is, for those of you who haven't yet made a portfolio but have a design background, it's a really sort of great process to go through, assembling your portfolio for the first time, because it allows you to begin to sort of collect, edit, refine, and reflect on your work, oftentimes for the first time, sort of comprehensively. So don't think of making your portfolio as kind of an assignment for applying for a job or for applying for school, because this is much an important moment for you to be able to reflect on who you are as a designer and what you want to say about your ambitions as a future designer or architect, as it is for us to be able to evaluate your skills. I hope I answered your question, Alex. Trilce, could you please talk about how to present the videos we upload in our portfolio? So you can certainly embed videos into a PDF and then upload the PDF. And I think within Slideroom, you might be able to just upload video content directly. So within Slideroom, you don't have to package everything in a single upload. In fact, because you're uploading, in some cases, fairly large files, it may be preferable to actually upload multiple things. So let's say that you have 5 projects in your portfolio. You might want to upload 5 different items to Slideroom. And if they're really well sort of numbered, then we know, okay, I've looked at 1 through 3, I've got 2 more to go. But it will make the upload process simpler, and then you can upload standalone video files since they tend to be larger. Next, does the resume, or is the resume optional to add into your portfolio? So you certainly don't have to put a resume or a CV into your portfolio, and for graduate school, if you don't have design experience, there's some questions of, what's the value of the resume anyway. But if you've worked in other fields and you're moving into design and it connects to your story about how you discovered that you want to be an architect or a designer, that can be really great. Or if you have certain volunteer experience, or you've been part of certain competitions or certain events or certain student organizations, that can be great to show in a portfolio. But it's not required that it be in your portfolio. I think it's a good thing. It's more and more sort of a norm, but it's certainly not a hard requirement. Yasmin asks, should we try to connect or find a connection between all our projects that we add to our portfolio? So it doesn't have to be like a strict formal connection, meaning that you don't necessarily have to find some kind of a concept that all of your work fits underneath. But oftentimes when you start pulling your work together, you might find that there are some informal connections between certain projects. So if I go back to Josh's portfolio for a second, where he's organized the work by desert or specific response to place and climate, and then others around impact, and then the third being about synthesis, it wasn't, when Josh was a sophomore or a junior in undergrad, he wasn't thinking, this is going to be what my arc is. That's sort of a revisionist way of trying to retrospectively organize the work. But you don't have to have a formal theme that you're putting everything on. You should just think about, as you're putting the portfolio together, are there connections that you can start to make, either between specific research interests or specific techniques that you might be using in representation of your work, that starts to kind of tie it together, even if loosely. And then Emily asks, how recent should the projects be? So they don't need to be, there's not a sort of expiration date on any of the work. So if you've got a really great project that's, more than 10, 15, 20 years old, but it still stands as a really great project, and it helps us to understand how you think and the types of experiences that you had, can absolutely include those. Obviously, one thing that comes up is if you have work that you produced a long time ago, and either the tools that you were using at the time have changed radically, or the techniques have changed radically, or even in some cases like trends or styles have changed radically. I think it's just important to contextualize, like, this was done in a particular moment. Here's how it connected to that time and place, and to just acknowledge that either you've changed in terms of your skill set, or other things have changed in terms of how your work's been produced. But there's certainly no reason to say, oh, well, that project's too old, I can't put it in my portfolio. If it's a great project and it helps us to understand your how you project as a graduate student in your studies, then absolutely include it. So that looks like, I think we've answered the questions that are currently in the Q&A, but we certainly still have some time left over. So if anyone wants to add any more questions, please do place those into the Q&A. But Christy, Corey, was there anything that I missed that we should sort of go over, or was there anything that came up in the chat while I was presenting that we want to kind of bring to the fore?
I answered one question about the GRE, like Christy mentioned in the presentation, the PhD and then the Master of Science in Architecture, the only two that require that. The other programs, it's optional if you want to submit, if you already have the scores already, but they're certainly not required in order to be admitted into the program.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing just about that. Currently, this year, I'm the interim director of the school, but previously I had been the head of our architecture program here in the school. And it was during that time, in overseeing the admissions process, that we began to really ask as a faculty whether or not keeping the GRE as an application requirement was helpful. And the reason that I say that is we did a kind of study looking back at a number of years of applicants to see, what was, if any, correlation between GRE scores and student success, both in the program and beyond the program. And what we found was that there really was no direct correlation, meaning that we had some students who had really great GRE scores, but struggled as a Master of Architecture student. We had some students who were really great students, but didn't have really great GRE scores. And it certainly wasn't affecting the ability of those students and now alums to go on to career success. So when we found that there was no correlation, we voted to take it out as a requirement. There's quite a bit of research that shows that standardized testing, while it can be really a strong indication for certain skills, it's not a very good tool for measuring whether or not someone's going to be a great architecture student or design student. We have another question from Trilce. It says, if we can add text in our visuals, then what should we type in the description box? Great question. So really, when you're captioning your work, if you have a drawing or an image, if the drawing or image kind of speaks for itself and it doesn't need a caption, then don't put a caption in just because you are concerned. But check that against the number of people that have never seen it before. If they can understand it, great. Obviously, there's a challenge there. You know what the drawing is about because you made the drawing, but check it with someone who's never seen it before. But then if you are going to be captioning it, if it does need a caption, then you want to make it as clear and concise as possible, and to be as almost pragmatic as possible. So for instance, let's say that I have a series of sketches that I'm putting in that shows the kind of trajectory of a project, how it went from an early concept to its sort of final incarnation. Then I would caption it to say, process sketches showing development from idea to final design, so that it's purely just a description that helps us to understand that what I think I'm seeing is in fact what I'm seeing. So you don't necessarily want a caption to be more of a conceptual description. At the beginning of a project, so let's say you have a 3 or 4 page couple of spreads on a particular project. In the beginning, in the kind of paragraph, you might describe in a more poetic way the concept of the project. But when you're captioning individual images or drawings, you want them to be just really pragmatic and really clear, just to say like, this is a rendering that was made early on in the process, or this is a photograph of a physical study model that was made early on in the process, so that we are able to understand sort of how it fits into the development of the project. And again, the intention here is we're trying to understand, how do you think? So if I go back to Josh Green for a second, the portfolio that was desert impact and synthesis. So Josh, after finishing his undergrad, went on to work at Mass Design as part of a fellowship in Kigali, Rwanda. Mass Design is this globally renowned firm that's doing this really great work in Kigali and around Kigali, Rwanda. And it's a semi-arid climate, so it has some connection to the desert climate that we're in here, and it's socially focused work. So Josh, in his portfolio, is really sort of describing his social focus, is describing having a sort of place-based attitude about design. So he's talking about why those things are important to him, and then he's seeking out experiences that reinforce what he's looking for as a future architect. And so just think about how can you use the text to basically explain sort of where you're coming from as a designer. So we have a question in the chat. Could you mention the maximum size of the portfolio? So yeah, I was saying before, I would argue maximum number of projects is 7. Maximum number of pages should be about 50. Now, we don't have a formal requirement, and we've certainly had applicants put in more than 50 pages or more than 7 projects. But I would say that just as someone who's looked through thousands of portfolios, once you get sort of beyond that, it starts to feel like the student doesn't have the ability to sort of edit and or doesn't have the confidence that they can say everything that they want to try to say with less space. And so while it's not a hard and fast requirement, my advice to you would be no more than 7 projects maximum and no more than 50 pages maximum. Okay, coming back to the Q&A. So it says, for video submission, what is more important, to submit a 3D of a particular project or slides of different projects? So I would say that we don't have a way of accepting a 3-dimensional model and opening that. That won't work in SlideRoom. So slides or pages of projects is going to be the right way to go there. And again, if you have questions about how to submit in SlideRoom, please reach out to Corey and Christy. We can help you out there. Alex has another question. It says, it seems like some portfolios were formatted more like a book and others that were more single pages as if it were more of a slideshow. Is there a recommendation on how to approach formatting for a more successful portfolio? Maybe this is less important with a digital portfolio, or I'm still curious if there's a formatting strategy. And so it's a great question. Obviously, in the digital world today, you're not sitting in a book. It used to be that you would have to kind of print your book and you would put it in the mail and you would send it to schools that you were applying to. I do think that we're still kind of very interested in book format, and a lot of our students want to have a print copy so that they can, show it to friends and family who maybe aren't familiar with a digital portfolio. But even when portfolios were more printed, it was not uncommon to have sort of a sleeve or a folder, and then you would put plates of work in rather than put a bound linear copy. And the argument around the sort of plate strategy was that you could change the order if you wanted to for different audiences. You could change the length if you wanted to for different audiences. So there's not really I would say there's different philosophical approaches to why one might take more of a rigid book approach versus a slides-based approach. And I would say that there's not really an advantage one versus the other. It's, I would argue, purely subjective. Some people like the book format, some people like the slides format. But generally speaking, if the work is really strong, it's going to carry the day, regardless of whether you put it in book format or you have it just as more of a slideshow. We have another question here. In the group work, should I mention each member's role or only my role in the project? So I don't think it's important necessarily to explain the role of others. The most important thing is to acknowledge that you had a team and then to be very clear about your role. And I think it's also really important to use the limited amount of text that you'll put there to sort of talk about your, let's say, reflection on working in that team. So what were the things that you really took away from it, and what did you learn from working in that team? Emily has another question. Do you have any suggestions for how to explain or show your design process for an already completed project that we don't have progress concept images of? I love this question. This is a really great question. So every designer does a certain amount of sort of revisionist work to try to kind of explain how the project went from research to completion. And inevitably, we sort of make it seem really simple. In architecture specifically, there's a famous architecture firm called Bjarke Ingels Group, or BIG. And when that firm first sort of launched, they were famous for making these process diagrams that explained sort of why the building is formed the way that it is. And inevitably, it makes it seem like, oh, it's just really simple. You know, designed the space to maximize the site, and then you twisted it to face, you know, a view of the mountain or whatever it might be. But it's never that simple. You're trying a lot of different things. And so if you have to go back and make diagrams or make sketches that help explain the process, even if it's sort of simplifying the realities of the process, everybody does that. And it's a reality across all of our disciplines in all of design and architecture. Sarah has a question. Is it necessary or a good idea to specifically name the software used in projects? So no. However, in your resume or CV, if you choose to put that into the portfolio, oftentimes you'll see students sort of measure their proficiency. So you'll see students who will say, like, you know, I'm really proficient in Rhino, I'm sort of proficient in Revit, I'm really proficient in Grasshopper, whatever it might be. And so putting your, let's say, your breadth of skills in is not a bad idea, but you don't need to tell us, I made this drawing in this particular way, unless it's part of the process. And the case where that really becomes common is if it's a parametric visual scripted project, and you want to show sort of how you made a script that manipulates the project towards a certain parametric goal. You might include that and show us then, okay, here's the Grasshopper script or the Dynamo script or whatever it might be. But it's really not necessary. At the end of the day, you want the ideas and the process and the product, the design process, and then the outcome to carry the day. And the tools that you used are not critical. Should the portfolio be 50 pages, including the resume and front and last pages? Yeah, I would say that you don't want to have more than 50 total, including table of contents, cover, resume, etc. And if you find that you've just got a ton of work and you want to build all of it out in your portfolio so that you have, you know, a 75-page portfolio for yourself, that's not a problem. But then when you're putting together the portfolio that you're going to submit for, in this case, graduate school, edit out the things that you think are less important and really focus on what's the really strong project that you're going to lead with, what's the really strong project that you're going to end with, and then what's a good cross section in between that helps us to understand the range of experiences and or the range of interests that you have as a designer. And then it says, do you think it would be recommended to add a QR pin to show some render views in the project? Certainly not a bad idea to include a sort of QR code. I will say that, again, in many instances, because whoever's reviewing your portfolio is likely looking at hundreds of portfolios, you can't ever be guaranteed that they're going to use a QR scanner and actually pull up those things. But if you think it's important, and if you think it's a good way for you to show some additional skills, it doesn't hurt to include it. But you don't want to bank everything on that, because there is a good chance that someone's either not going to have a QR scanner, it's not going to be working, or they're just not going to take the time to do it. So whatever you do, if you do go that route, don't let it be a sort of make or break component of your portfolio. Let the portfolio stand on its own without that, so that if someone doesn't use it, it doesn't harm your chances of getting into the school that you're looking for or getting into the job that you're looking for. How many pages should we consider for the thesis project if it has information on an urban scale? So this is really important. Oftentimes, you might have one or two projects in your portfolio that were longer projects that have more research and have more analysis to them. Research and analysis is certainly really important, especially for a graduate student. It shows that you have those abilities, that you're not just, let's say, good at making form or good at making drawings, but you also have the ability to do deeper research and connect it to other outcomes. But I would say, there again, like you don't need to show us everything. You really just want to hit the high notes there. So, 5 pages, maybe 6 should be plenty. If you need more than 6 pages, then I think it comes time to start looking at, okay, how can I edit this in a way that it can be clearer? There's a question, is there any special softwares that we need to be proficient in for the Master of Landscape Architecture? So the answer there is no. We don't have any hard requirements. And there again, it's because we have students who are coming in with backgrounds in something else. So there might be a student in landscape architecture that has a background in forestry or in botany or in earth science who have no design experiences. We have courses in which we will, teach drawing, teach modeling, teach representation. But there again, if you have certain softwares that you are proficient in, it doesn't hurt to put in your resume that, you've got certain skills in Illustrator or in GIS or whatever it might be, because it helps us to be confident that, yeah, the student's going to be really successful. But if you don't have those skills, don't feel like that's a disqualifier. At the end of the day, if you have the abilities to be a great, in this case, landscape architect, but you don't necessarily know how to use a certain software, we will help you with that when you arrive. Should we put our models and photographs in the portfolio? If so, before or after the resume? So I would put the resume at the end. So everything, I would argue, should come before it. And then yes, absolutely, you should put models, photographs, drawings, sketches, anything that really helps to explain a project and how you approached and tackled the problems of that project or the opportunities of that project. And I would, again, just say, start with a table of contents so we know how the portfolio is structured. Put together a rhythm for how you're going to walk us through each project, and then end with the resume. Is it better to have one project showing handwork skills and other projects showcasing digital skills? Also, should we include a research paper inside a portfolio? So I don't want to discourage you from including a research paper. If you feel like it's a really strong and important research paper, you can include it. I would say that the likelihood that it's going to be read is fairly low, because people are going through these portfolios and really looking for your representation skills, process, etc. But if it's really important, you could include it. Otherwise, you might just think about what is the research that you can pull out of it, that you can put into a format that can be really quickly understood without someone having to read the whole thing from beginning to end. And then relative to the question about hand drawing or hand making versus digital work, I think it's great to have both. In many instances, simply because so much of what we do is digital today, I would say you want to begin with something that is that demonstrates that you have digital skills and end with something that shows that you have digital skills. But if in the middle you want to focus on either your hand drawing skills or your hand making skills, it's great. Certainly, it's still an important part of the design process. We don't do everything inside the computer. We're oftentimes modeling things or sketching ideas outside of the computer and then figuring out how do we translate it into the computer. So showing that you have those skills is never a bad thing. I think that covers everything in the Q&A. Thank you all again. I think we're now getting close to the end of our time, but there were a lot of really great questions. I hope this was really helpful. And again, we will share out a recording so that you can go back through it. I apologize if I spoke too fast at any point. So I hope that you're able to watch it again if there were some things that I said that weren't clear. But it was really great having you all. We look forward to seeing your portfolios as you complete those. And if you have any questions or you need any help getting your portfolios uploaded to SlideRoom or other questions about the application process, please don't hesitate to reach out to Corey or Christy. If within that there are questions about curriculum, questions for advice about internships or career opportunities, etc., they'll be happy to connect you with any one of our faculty colleagues, including our program leaders, to make sure that you get the support that you need. And we really hope that we'll see all of you here in Tempe, hopefully sometime in August. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Good to see you, Trilce. All right, I'm gonna step out, but thank you both. That was great.